I think that the starting point of any discussion of trade and financial policy should be recognition of the fact that U.S. economic and military aggression is dividing the world into two economic and trading and currency areas. On the one hand, you have the United States and NATO, the European Garden. On the other hand, you have the global majority. Now, this tendency to split is irreversible. The world majority is defending itself, is being driven to defend itself by moving away from U.S. control and its American free trade policy, America's political interference and regime change, and above all, its neoliberal dollarization through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and dependency on the dollar. This dependency has left an enormous debt of global South countries, of Asian countries, and the flow for the last few years has been a steady flow of debt service to the United States and Europe in far in excess of the financial flows that these countries are receiving. So the global South countries have been drained of their financial resources. They don't have enough money to support the government policy of investing in infrastructure, of rebuilding their industry, of modernizing their agriculture, as long as they have to impose austerity on their economy to pay their existing debt service. And this financial debt service is holding them in bondage in the same way that the old European colonialism did. And yet it seems to be doing it without military force that the European mother countries used against their colonies. But of course, there is military force. There are the military bases all over the world. And we see what the United States is doing in Palestine to basically try to impose genocide on the Palestinians in order to enable Israel to protect America's interest in controlling all of Near Eastern oil. And by controlling the Near Eastern countries and the oil producers, using Israel as its essentially satellite to do this, the United States has the ability to just turn off the gas, the oil, and the electric power that other countries need. This is the kind of threat that the United States is doing. It's imposed sanctions on exports. So just like it's trying to cut off oil to countries that it wants to hurt, it's trying to cut back information technology, almost any technology that it claims can be of a military character. Week after week, President Biden says we're preparing America as a war economy to go to war with China in either next year or the year after. China is our number one enemy. And if for the time being, we're fighting our number two enemy, Russia. And Russia is our number two enemy because Russia is protecting China militarily, and they're both protecting each other to become independent of America's ability to use military force to force them to remain part of the dollar system. Well, America's third enemy for many decades has been Iran. And so these are the three countries that are the strongest potential leaders of designing an alternative international economic order to what the United States wants. Not only in a different economic order, but this is going to involve, as we've spoken before, an alternative to the IMF, to the World Bank, to the use of the dollar, to dependency on America's trade. And ultimately, we've seen even the United Nations, because the United Nations and its agencies have ceased to function now that the US and its satellites are blocking any move that will benefit the global majority, Eurasia, and the global South. So America's free trade policy is connected to this financial policy. It aims to block other countries from protecting their own industry and agriculture, which is what the United States has done. The United States and Europe don't want other countries to follow the policy that it's done on its to make its own economy develop. The United States has been imposing sanctions, foreign military to operations to destabilize Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, and other countries to prevent them from becoming self-sufficient and therefore independent of America's ability to force them to follow policies that benefit the United States and its European satellites. So the aim is all of this is to force them to privatize and to relinquish their mineral and oil rights, their main public utilities, and above all, the rights to recover damages from the pollution that the oil companies cause. The American rules and the investment dispute court prevent any country from fining American or European oil companies or mining companies to clean up the damage. This is a one-sided agreement, and it's that kind of a world that you're having the global majority and the BRICS plus countries try to create an alternative order. So that by following this sort of destructive advice, debtor countries have been persuaded to paint themselves into a financial corner. The global South countries are running a chronic balance of payments deficits that make them basically even more dependent on getting IMF dollar loans. And these loans come with conditionalities that block them from taking control of the economy. The IMF said, we will loan you money, but you have to sell off and privatize your public enterprises, your public utilities, your land, and you have to sell it off and pay the money that you've already, the loans that we've made to make you even more dependent and even less able to produce, protect yourselves. So you're having this basically a downward spiral, and the only way that it can be stopped is to break away and say we have a choice. Either we can continue to pay the dollar debts to the West, or we can use the money that we have to develop our own economies. What are we going to do? Support the West or our own economies? That's the underlying conflict that's happening today. And any discussion of monetary policy or trade policy has to realize that this conflict is reaching a crisis now. And emotionally, we can see this most of all in what the United States is doing along with Israel to the Palestinians. It's essentially saying we can destroy a whole population of a country if that country doesn't do what we want. This is killing the chicken to frighten the monkeys. It's a demonstration that this will happen to you if you withdraw. Well, for the first time, other countries have an alternative to this U.S. control. And that alternative is to join together and say, we have a critical mass. Now that China, Russia, Iran, along with Cuba and Venezuela, have been forced to go it alone and to be self-sufficient as a result of the sanctions, they're strong enough to form the core of the rest of the global South countries, Africa, South America, and the rest of Asia can be independent of the U.S.-centered economy and follow their own rules of international law and courts that they will create instead of following the U.S. rules-based order. So in order for them to develop, they have to withdraw from the pro-U.S. policies that the IMF and the World Bank and other international organizations that it controls are forcing them to do. And obviously, these countries are still going to need support to build their own infrastructure. And the support for the first time in 75 years is available from Russia, China, Iran, and other strong countries. For the first time, the rest of the world has an alternative to dependency on the dollar for the international resources that they need to build up their ports, their railroads, their infrastructure, their electric companies, their industrial base, their agriculture along lines to feed themselves instead of growing export crops for the West. For the first time now, there is the material conditions for them to be independent. That's why President Biden and the United States officials say China is the #1 enemy. It's the #1 enemy because it's strong enough to be independent and self-sufficient and doesn't need the United States. And Russia's the #2 enemy. The sanctions against Russia have enabled it to actually be self-sufficient. And that self-sufficiency has made it the #2 enemy of the United States. Enemy because it can support itself. And the same with Iran. Iran has been facing so many American sanctions in the last few decades that it's become independent. And all of these countries being independent together have become a core that can lead the BRICS and other countries into an alternative of dependency on each other rather than on the United States, and to enable them not to need American exports, not to need to use the dollar, no need to borrow dollars to finance their own industry because they can create their own money at home to finance their own industry. So here's the problem at the present that they're trying to solve. Global South countries, Latin America and Africa, are in much the same condition that Haiti was in when it achieved its independence in 1804. Haiti wanted to free the slaves, and the condition of its freeing its slaves was that it had to pay the French slave owners compensation. Well, the United States in its Civil War fought a civil war against slavery, and the North said, we're not going to pay to free the slaves because slavery is wrong. We're not, the slaves shouldn't have been enslaved to begin with, so we're going to free them. Haiti was not in as strong a position as the U.S. North in the Civil War. It had to pay France so much foreign debt that it has never gotten out of poverty ever since 1804. It's been constantly trying to pay because it couldn't simply repudiate slavery. It had to pay the debt. Same thing that happened in Greece. Greece won its freedom from the Ottoman Empire in the 1820s. And it was suddenly broke. And what did it have to do? It borrowed in 1821, after its independence, it borrowed from the Ricardo brothers in England debt so that it could begin rebuilding its economy. And the debts that it borrowed were so great that it never recovered through all the way down to World War I. It was absolutely strapped. Even though there was no International Monetary Fund in its day, it was completely strapped. Now, that's the condition that Global South countries are going to find themselves in if they do not withdraw from the dollar area. And essentially, the debts that Haiti should have just wiped out if they could have are similar to the debts that the Global South countries have. The Global South doesn't have slavery, but what it has had is a distorted economy that has been steered by the United States, the International Monetary Fund, and especially the World Bank to be a raw materials service supplier and low-wage labor supplier to the United States and Europe. This is wage slavery, you can call it, instead of domestic slavery. And that is the U.S. policy is to make Africa, Latin America look very much like Haiti after its independence. So that by following this destructive advice, debtor countries have been persuaded to paint themselves into a financial corner. Chronic balance of payments deficits and trade patterns that make them even more dependent on getting more IMF dollar loans, on conditionalities that prevent them from pursuing pro-labor policies, socialist policies, and active government investment to help prosperity, just as the United States and Europe did, and what they do not want other countries to emulate. They want to pull up the ladder and say, we're going to maintain our dominance. We don't want other countries to get wealthy and industrial in the way that we did. That's the context for any discussion that we have about dollarization.